This is indicative of what's going on the financial world, which is chaos, and their desperate attempts to keep the old system going, which is going to fail ultimately. And the New Delhi and Abu Dhabi have inked a currency swap agreement to boost trade and investment without involvement of a third currency like the US dollar. And the swap is for an amount of 2 billion United Arab Emirates dirham, or 35 billion Indian rupees, which is roughly $495 million, according to the Indian Embassy in Abu Dhabi. The bilateral currency swap agreement between India and the United Arab Emirates is expected to reduce the dependency on hard currencies, take note of that, like the US dollar. And it's also expected to give a push for the local currencies of the two nations and may reduce the impact of volatility in exchange rates arising from the dependency on the third currency. And it's also expected to reduce the transmission costs arising from exchange rate risk. That's the Federal Reserve, 10 cents on the dollar. The sides also discussed cooperation in energy, security, trade, investments, space, defence and so on. With more than 50 billion in bilateral trade, the two countries are each other's largest trading partners. And India's foreign direct investment into the United Arab Emirates was 6.6 billion in 2017, while vice versa stood at 5.8. Mr. Buffett wants to make a big acquisition, which is a heads up they're expecting a collapse. That's how it works. And the Oracle of Omar's Berkshire Hathaway conglomerate is stated to have nearly 130 billion in cash, which is complete and utter rubbish. Nearly said something else then. That can be used in a deal, but that would be Buffett deeming worthy of buying at a time when stocks remain near record highs. Now, what he's doing is he's collecting cash and waiting for the crash, which they're trying to engineer, and then they buy up all the cheap stock. Decentralise it again. Now, soaring values or valuations have kept Buffett, who prefers to take the long-term view and wait for bargains. And it's now 5 years since his last major acquisition. And he told the Financial Times last week that Berkshire Hathaway turned down an overture last fall for jewellery retailer Tiffany to buy it. Yes, he's waiting for everything else, like certain other clowns, to crash. We'll see about that. The US has reversed its decision to brand China a currency manipulator. Oh my. Accusing others of doing what you've been doing is also common these days, as the two countries prepare to wind down their trade war. And the US said it had made the change because China had agreed to refrain from devaluing its currency to make its own goods cheaper for foreign buyers. And Washington and Beijing were expected to sign that Phase 1 pact, which was last week. Now, the deal is aimed at de-escalating the tit-for-tat tariff war the two countries have engaged in since 2018. Now, for new listeners, of which there are many, this is not a trade war between America, the country, and China, the country, or the respective governments. This is to do with bogus trade deals, be it the Trans-Pacific, Transatlantic, and the various other trade deals that were done that are nothing to do with the governments or the countries, and everything to do with rogue dragon groups making vast amounts of money on those deals. That's the real issue that's going on. They're fighting the dragon groups, not each other. So China has made enforceable commitments to refrain from competitive devaluation while promoting transparency and accountability, according to the US Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. Oh boy. And Donald Trump has repeatedly accused China, which is not correct, it's the dragon groups, of allowing the value of the yuan to fall, which is making the Chinese goods cheaper. This is because the global elites were transferring all the wealth from the West to the East. That's the whole reason for it. But on Monday, the US said that the value of the yuan had appreciated since August at the height of the trade war, and Mr. Munchkin also said that China had made enforceable commitments to refrain from devaluation and to share more information about its exchange rates. In this context, he said, the Treasury has determined that China should no longer be designated as a currency manipulator at this time. Said the real currency manipulators. You can't make this stuff up. Perhaps that's the first of my Thomasisms. That for those of you on Facebook will have seen that post. Let's see how many I can get through tonight. Leaked documents reveal how Africa's richest woman made her fortune through exploiting her own country, her own people, and corruption. Isabel dos Santos got access to lucrative deals involving land, oil, diamonds, and telecoms when her father was president of Angola, which is a southern African country rich in natural resources. Now, the documents show that she and her husband were allowed to buy valuable state assets in a series of suspicious deals, and Miss Santos says that the allegations against her are entirely false, which is not correct, and that they are politically motivated witch hunt by the Angolan government, some of which are not correct also. The former president's daughter has made the UK her home and owns expensive properties in central London, and she's already under criminal investigation by the authorities in Angola for corruption, and her assets in the country have been frozen. Now, the BBC Panorama has been given access to more than 700,000 leaked documents about the billionaire's business empire, and most were obtained by the platform to protect whistleblowers in Africa and shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. That's a bit of a misnomer. And they've been investigated by 37 media organisations, including The Guardian and Portugal's Expresso newspaper. Now, the average income in Angola, to put this in all perspective, the average income in Angola is $4,170 a year. But this actually masks the big disparities, as 30% of the population live in complete poverty, which is less than $1.90 a day. Meanwhile, it's the second biggest oil producer in Africa, and also a major diamond producer. We'll have more on Miss Santos later in an op-ed piece. The University of California at Berkeley's Executive Director of Financial Planning and Analysis was arrested on Thursday for suspicion of misdemeanor charges of possessing child pornography. John Bain Chekal, who is 49, was released from Berkeley's jail later last week, which is standard protocol for misdemeanor offences according to the police. Now, the investigation into Bain Shakal began after the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children received a tip about child pornography from an online account, according to the Berkeley police spokesman. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the Concord Police Department, and members from Contra Costa County's District Attorney Office and also the Sheriff Office assisted in the investigation. Quite a mouthful there. Norwegian Finance Minister Siv Jensen and her right-wing Progress Party has resigned from the government over a cabinet decision to help bring a woman suspected of being ISIS and affiliated to it back home to Norway. And the resignation robs the Conservative Prime Minister Erna Solberg of her parliamentary majority and could make the country more difficult to govern. But Solberg still plans to remain in office as the head of a minority coalition. Lots of fun and games there. NATO. Subintel. Iraqi officials fear economic collapse if Washington imposes threatened sanctions, including blocking access to a US-based account where Baghdad keeps oil revenues. No surprise there. And that account feeds 90% of the national budget. So this is what the clowns are up to. And Donald Trump was outraged, it is said, by the Iraqi parliament voting on January the 5th to oust foreign forces, which is the US, including 5,000 American troops, 5,200 to be precise, who have helped local soldiers beat back jihadists, as is said, since 2014. Not quite. And if troops were asked to leave, he threatened, we will charge them sanctions like they've never seen before, according to Mr. Trump. But this is an example of how politics works. That account is controlled by the same agency rogue clowns, along with Obama, the Bush Group, Netanyahu, and the Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran, funny enough. And they're holding the whole country hostage over the oil, because they want it for free. Now, Trump has said several times, but this is how politics works, and this is why I said, going back last year, never believe what is said in public too much. Trump has said several times now he wants to bring home the troops that are fighting abroad, be it Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan. But he is aware of the national security issue surrounding foreign-based American troops returning home. But then the country states we don't want or need your troops anymore, and then out comes the threat of sanctions, etc. It's two opinions bouncing from one to the other. And it's not indicative of mixed messages, more a case of direct interference. Outgoing Bank of England, another one who's bit the dust, Governor Mark Carney said central banks globally, listen closely, are getting close to running out of tools. I think there's plenty of tools in there already. Should they need to tackle another serious economic downturn. And he said, it's generally true that there is much less ammunition for all the major central banks than they previously had. And I'm of the opinion that this situation will persist for some time. He said it's not clear that monetary policy would have sufficient space if it needs to combat anything worse than a conventional recession. Very cleverly worded. Our members will, or regular listeners will get that. And that's a view echoed elsewhere amongst economists and monetary circles. At the European Central Bank, new president, I don't know whether it's male or female, anyway, it's Christine Lagarde, has echoed her predecessor, Mario Draghi, in urging governments with budgetary space to spend more. They haven't got any, jackass. Zero, nothing. Spend more that you haven't got. Yeah, that worked well for several governments, didn't it? And all nations to make growth-boosting reforms. Well, all nations can boost growth exponentially if plans like her and organisations like the Bank of England didn't stop blocking the funds coming out. Now, Carney, who will leave the Bank of England in March, was the first foreign-born governor of the 3-century-old institution, who started in 2013 with the intention of shaking up the organisation while gradually normalising monetary policy. He was soon drawn into the political upheaval surrounding the Scottish referendum, Brexit, and also the general elections. I believe Brexit is ending this week, so I'm told. And the bank left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 0.75% last month, with a minority of the rate setting panel calling for a cut. Now, the final rate decision and fresh round of economic forecasts are scheduled for January the 30th, the day before Britain quits the European Union. This next piece, where are we? Highlights what we put out in Clowns in Panic. The head of UBS Group AG's Strategic Development Lab is turning his focus to the, quote, human survivors of the tech invasion, persuading them to understand things will never be the same. Interesting comment. They're going to have to, in the jargon of Silicon Valley's missionaries, which is Langley Clowns, unlearn how they've always operated. And he said it's not just that their software may know their next move before they do. The extinction of an entire way of life is looming. And as Pervez sees it, it's the end of the bonus culture. So it's not a warning just to the people, it's to the leeches in Wall Street, etc. Compensation will be a last frontier in the onslaught of technology on finance. He's moving traders towards electronic systems as the era of legendary gamblers stalking the markets in search of the $100 million payday becomes a distant memory. What's coming is increased bureaucratization, an evolution that renders the individual's judgment less important, and with it the need to reward them as they might once have expected. This is decentralization. And he said, we want to hire people who are less driven by their own bonus and P&L and more by the long-term goal of what the market will look like in, say, 10 years. And the idea that you are responsible for your own destiny has gone. Oh my. It's a team sport, he said. A team sport that only the select few can take part in, as in multi-billionaires. And the moves in that direction are only accelerating. This came from another story. Coders have been handed the licenses to trade equities at JP Morgan Chase, while their focus of the biggest hiring spree in recent years for Goldman Sachs trading division. Citigroup plans to recruit 2,500 programmers this year. Oops. We'll have more on that later. The competition for talent with companies like Google and Facebook hasn't caused a surge in banker bonuses, and while tech skills are still in high demand, that doesn't always translate to more compensation. Most trader payouts are forecast to remain steady or decline, according to analysis by recruiting firm Options Group. All of that was warned of in the Clowns in Panic show. And if you want more evidence of that, listen to that show. Watch the series Continuum. It's all there. Further evidence of Clowns in Panic. Also, India has more than 560 million internet users, and about 800 million who have hardly any food, all generating data by the terabyte. And it is said soon they will have an unprecedented amount of control over their digital financial footprints, with the ability to decide what to share with whom and for how long. So what that is telling you is banks are going to go and everything will be done online. I hope you understand the implications of that. If you don't, listen to Clowns in Panic. And India's top banks are getting ready to roll out a system that gives consumers access to a wide swathe of their financial data and allows them to share it instantly. Why would they want to do that? Backed by the Reserve Bank of India, it's an ambitious approach that combines privacy protection, that's an illusion, with credit reporting. If it works, it says, it could unlock the credit market for millions of Indians while offering new levels of data security and consumer control. And India's effort is one of a handful of initiatives around the globe to return control of data to consumers, notably with the open banking movement in Europe and Australia. India's approach is unique. It relies on third parties to mediate the often complicated process of information sharing. In other words, echelon. Oops. And so is its target population, which is predominantly poor and as of now excluded from the former banking system. Well, you've got to have money to begin with to be able to bank it. The account aggregator system will be offered by banks and licensed by India's central bank, which will also regulate the data collection and sharing by logging into authorized apps. Users will be able to pull together all kinds of financial data, spending patterns, bill repayments, tax returns, business transactions, that they can then choose to share instantly and temporarily in pursuit of loans, investment products, or even insurance. Well, lots of people will fall for that. It's the classic tactic of seducement. Think of the time it could save you and how much easier it'll be. No, that's that word convenience again. And those words to a critical thinker are a blaring red flag. When they say things like this to seduce you in, it's going to save time and this and that, think differently of how that system or program can be weaponized against us, because then you will get nearer to the truth. In 2016, Harvey Weinstein hired a private intelligence firm to spy on a long list of people, including those accusing him of sexual assault. Now, our show highlighted one particular female doing that in a recent show, and this comes now as another US actress, Annabella Sciorra, of Sopranos fame, has testified in the Harvey Weinstein trial that the film producer pinioned and raped her at her home 25 years ago. Now, this latest private spy that Weinstein paid for is Seth Friedman. And he was posing as a journalist. Well, that shouldn't have taxed his acting abilities too much, should it? And he called high-profile people like actress Rose McGowan to extract information that he then fed back to Weinstein. And he spoke to the BBC in the past week about his work for Weinstein and his thoughts on #MeToo. Now, the allegations against Weinstein include rape and a sexual assault relating to two unnamed accusers, as well as Annabella Sciorra. And he obviously denies all charges against them and insists that the sexual encounters were consensual. In their world, consensual has a completely different meaning. The technology frequency headphone-based company Bose is now significantly shrinking the number of retail stores it operates because of the dramatic shift, it says, to online shopping. Convenience again, weaponized. And the maker of the high-end electronics said it's closing 119 retail stores worldwide across North America, Europe, Japan and Australia. But it will continue to operate 130 stores throughout China, the United Arab Emirates, India and some Asian countries. You notice the difference? It's that east and west again. Now, 100 of those stores that are going to close are in America. And judging by this piece, there will be none left here, except for its, wait for it, Amazon online storefronts. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, the closures illustrate the likelihood of another brutal year for the retail industry. And last year, US retailers announced 9,302 store closings, a jump of 59% from 2018. You know, this show warned of this 2 or 3 years back. It's all being harvested into the select few. And Amazon is the biggest problem. And yet people still order online from them. There's going to be no jobs left. None. You either work for Amazon or Walmart or that's it. And if you don't believe that, here's what the analysts have to say. Online sales make up around 16% of retail sales today, but they will rise to 25% by 2026. And the analysts estimated in a research report that could force another 75,000 store closures by 2026. One thing I need to point out, you ever noticed the products of closed down retail stores never go down? Even when an online market is introduced. Now, with less than 100 less storefront shops, which then drastically reduces their overheads, one would think the price of the product would plunge, would it not? But it never happens, does it? Sad story out of New York, and it's not a surprise given we've covered what's going on in New York and in particular relating to vaccines. Now, the mother of an 11-year-old Hamburg, New York boy who recently died from flu-related complications doesn't want her son to be remembered as just a statistic, but rather as the wonderful boy he was. In came the vaccine program people and kicked right into gear. Kalani said Luca was sickened with the flu early last week, and by Wednesday, after not seeing any improvement, he was taken to the hospital for fluids. There, he was diagnosed with septic shock, and his condition steadily deteriorated, and he later suffered a fatal cardiac arrest, according to his mother. Now, the kicker to this rather sad story is Luca was vaccinated for flu on December the 12th. And it's up to all parents in New York to take your own responsibility. F the system and their threats. Your obligation is to your child. This is what happens.